So I'm talking about video games today, but I didn't really study new media or computer science. I didn't go to a famous university. I haven't been making video games myself. I got my PhD in Hawaii, and I specialized in ancient and medieval Japanese literature. I just finished my first book about how the oldest collection of Japanese poetry was studied in medieval and modern eras. And now you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is not at all related to video games. But you see, when I was writing this book, I realized I wasn't dealing with something culturally or historically isolated. I was writing about channels of knowledge transmission, which depending on the moment in history can take different shapes and forms. And I needed a new approach, a key to understand it. I was writing about systems of knowledge production and transmission that can travel through time. That's right, like from the medieval to the modern era, possibly in an invisible space rocket. I was writing about modern networks of knowledge grafted on top of much older networks of knowledge. And because I wrote about the modern and contemporary periods too, I bumped into some video games featuring pre-modern Japan. So I started playing games, developed some courses based on video games, and saw how my students respond when I talked to them about pre-modern Japan through video games. And then I realized that video games are one of the newest and possibly the most effective channels of knowledge transmission. Seriously, suddenly my students wanted to learn and they did homework. I've never given so many A's in my life. But because gaming is such a big industry, it's everywhere and everyone does it. I mean, it's just not just my students, even my dogs try to play on video games on my phone sometimes, like yesterday. And because of that, we could talk about how it's affecting us in our channels of knowledge transmission. For example, video games can change how some cultures are imagined. And that's because game developers, especially in the West, are not always trained in cultural studies, languages, and history, but instead in engineering and computer science. So how do they build their games? Well, they sometimes rely on collective imagination of cultures presented in mass media, and not always on academic research. And by doing that, they reimagine and sometimes distort facts and end up altering the image and perception of cultures over time. For example, there is this Japanese hero named Genji in an American video game Overwatch who's quite removed from the classical and medieval Japanese Genji characters. He is a Japanese playboy who gets in a fight with his brother Hanzo, almost dies, and is rescued by the organization Overwatch. Once he recovers and becomes a cyborg, Genji joins the Overwatch team and fights AI robots who want to destroy humanity. After a while, he gets conflicted about his cyber identity and travels the world searching for the meaning of life. This Genji is complicated. It's a warrior who moves quickly during fights, but he's also fragile. He's somewhat similar to a male character from the world's first novel and Japanese classic, The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu, in which Genji is also a sensitive playboy who goes through an identity crisis. But Overwatch Genji is also a warrior. And this part of his identity can be traced back to the Genpei War in the medieval era, marked with the establishment of the first shogunate in Japan's history. One of the heroes of this war, Minamoto Yoshitsune, was a famous warrior from the Genji clan. Yoshitsune is a combination of a warrior and delicate nobleman who likes poetry and other arts. He has a soft side. And there is more. There are more layers to the Overwatch Genji identity. For example, he quotes a martial arts icon, Miyamoto Musashi, in his commentary on swordsmanship, A Book of Five Rings, which is well known in the West and has been translated into English many times. Mi o sutete mo, myori wa sutezu, translates to even if I sacrifice my life, I won't sacrifice my honor. The Overwatch Genji borrows from other video games too. For example, the word Bushin, the god of war written on his chest, is borrowed from the ninja character Guy from the Japanese video game Final Fight from the 1980s. And Guy is a practitioner of a fictional style of ninja warfare called Bushinryu Ninjutsu. In addition, two other heroes in yet another Japanese video game series, Metal Gear, Raiden and Grey Fox, are cyborg ninjas too. So you see, the Overwatch Genji is a culture and media mix. He's destabilized, reorganized, remodernized, and displaced, because despite being a Japanese hero, he was designed by American game developers outside of Japan. So how did Overwatch make its Genji? Well, instead of asking experts for help, which is not uncommon, they sort of hacked Japanese culture and creatively retranslated whatever they found fitting for their hero. Genji is a transhistorical representation of how West imagines and reinvents aspects of pre-modern Japanese culture in Overwatch. So what are we dealing with here? First, new medievalism, which is visible in the fascination with the Middle Ages, unifying impact of technology, and tendency for never-ending updates without much consideration for the so-called original, which is noticeable in the Overwatch Genji, who reimagines pre-modern Japan as masculine and also violent. And there's also techno-Orientalism, which born in the cyberpunk genre and resulting from the anxiety about the fading dominance of the West, follows the idea of Asia as technologically advanced and threatening, but intellectually primitive. It envisions a future when Asians are dehumanized cyborgs dominating the world. So Overwatch presents a remixed version of Japan. And that may be true, but Genji was never known on a global scale before, and Overwatch made him cool and very famous. The Gen Z knows first and foremost the Overwatch Genji. If you Google Genji in the US and Europe, the Overwatch Genji is the very first result. So a non-Japanese game developer has changed the meaning of an ancient term Genji in less than a decade. And that is just one case. The fact is, video games feature various cultures and lead students into our classrooms. So I don't reject them, because they're helping us during the current humanities crisis and make the students want to learn about culture, art, and history. I embrace video games as the new channel of knowledge transmission that is universal and transnational. Video games may seem insignificant or intimidating, but they deeply affect our lives. Gaming is a huge industry of global value of almost $184 billion as of 2023. Gaming helps develop manual dexterity, strategic thinking, and communication. It can also change the volume and activity of the human brain. And I think it would be so cool to have gaming recognized at UT. With my colleagues Hillary Havens and Tore Olsen, we're running a research seminar on digital games at the Dembo Center for the Humanities and the Arts. And our purpose is to see if we could start a research center for digital games or a game lab, which could create pathways between academia, student education, and the gaming industry. Thank you very much.